Welcome to the Maryland Bluebird Society's Bluebirds Forever Festival. We thank you for joining us today for Dana Grayson's presentation, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, What Box is Best for Their Nest? Please do keep your videos off during the program, keep yourself muted, and if you have any questions along the way, just type them into the chat box and Dana will answer those questions at the end of her presentation. Afterwards, we'll spin the wheel to pick a winner for our raffle prizes, so stay tuned. With that, I'm going to do a quick introduction for Dana and she'll get started. So Dana grew up in Southwest Frederick County, surrounded by countryside and farmland. And this is where she first gained her love of nature and animals of all kinds. In 2013, Dana began working from home full-time and had more opportunities to witness nature in her own backyard, especially the birds. She began learning more all about birds who called her yard home and was captivated by the beauty and personalities of the eastern bluebirds. The following spring, she installed nest boxes and became a member of the Maryland Bluebird Society to learn more about how to make bluebird nesting season a success. In 2019, Dana joined the board of directors for MBS and is also one of two coordinators for Frederick County. She currently manages nest boxes on her own property and several other private properties. And with that, I will hand things over to Dana.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thanks all to the attendees who are here with us today. I am so excited that we brought our Bluebirds Forever Festival online so that even more people can join and learn and share and all things bluebird and other native cavity nesters. So I really can't thank you all enough for being here. And thank you, Lisa, for helping put all this together and for that introduction. Being a member of the Maryland Bluebird Society is such an honor, and just to remind everybody of what we do assist in monitoring increasing the population of eastern bluebirds and other native cavity nesters. There are several species that live here in Maryland, and we always want to be educating and informing our members and the general public about those bluebirds, supporting research about bluebirds and their habitat, and then cooperating with other organizations who have similar conservation purposes. So I'm honored to be a part of that mission. I care so much about our bluebirds, our tree swallows, chickadees, all of our lovely native cavity nesters. And so it's just really an honor to be part of this organization. So my presentation today is about nest boxes. I almost named it Birdhouse Hunters because it's really cute to think about how these eastern bluebirds in particular find a nest box or find any nesting site, whether it's a natural cavity or a nest box that someone has put up for them. And just really thinking about if we are going to try to help them by putting up an artificial home, a home that's not necessarily a natural cavity, but something else. It is a real responsibility. And if there's nothing else you take away from this week, I hope that everyone who joins us for these presentations comes away with thinking that this is not a set it and forget it hobby. It really is life or death for these birds who we share our yards with and put these nest boxes up for. And so it is really serious business. It's a big responsibility. And it all starts with the nest box. So I'm really excited to show you all what I have prepared today. So this is probably somewhat of a familiar sight to many of you. Have you ever walked down the aisle of your home store, a co-op, a feed and seed kind of store, and seen nest boxes or bird houses, I should say, that look like this? When I planned and said, the good, the bad, and the ugly, there are good boxes, as we'll talk about. There's bad boxes. I don't really think any of these are ugly. They're actually quite cute. And I think that's the point, is that these boxes, these houses, are meant to be cute. They're meant for you to walk down an aisle of a store and say, look how cute these are. I can just imagine putting them up in my backyard and seeing the little birds nest. And for people who aren't yet educated, the people who are drawn in by this, who don't yet know about what kinds of birds use these kinds of boxes, it really is a way to draw people in. But these are not designed with the birds in mind. These are designed either by artists who have taken great care to design something that they think is beautiful and is beautiful, that they want to use to draw birds in, or maybe commercially, just people who want to be able to sell you a birdhouse. And the cute birdhouses like this, the colorful ones, that you see that are so adorable, they do draw you in, and they're meant to sell these houses. But there's no regulation or rules about what you can create and sell in a marketplace as far as a birdhouse goes. So there's not necessarily any kind of standards you have to meet to say, oh, this is a birdhouse that is safe for birds. So what I really want to do today is for you to take away what are some of the good qualities of a nest box, especially for eastern bluebirds and our other native cavity nesters, and why are some of these commercially available, very cute boxes and houses not to be used. There could be gorgeous decoration, maybe buy one and plug up the hole and don't use it, or use it as an interior decoration somewhere. But these are really bad news for the most part for actually wanting to help the birds survive and thrive. And so that's what I want you to take away today is what the qualities are of a good bird nest box. So just before we get too much into the presentation, I want to step back and remind everybody that even when it comes to these good boxes, these boxes that are meant, put a lot of research into them, that are quality nest boxes, even within that, there are so many different designs and styles out there. Not all of them are wood. There are some people who have used with success a PVC style nest box. You can see on the upper left there, that's almost painted to look like a birch tree. So there are different materials other than wood. And there are lots of different designs out there that have all evolved from that basic nest box design that started decades ago when people started trying to help the eastern bluebirds. So I'm not going to touch too much on those different designs. They are out there. I have resources that I will give you if you'd like to explore more about the different styles and designs that have been evolved over the years that people have found work in certain climates, work for certain species, have their own personal success with. But today, what I'm going to focus more on is just the qualities of a good nest box, some of the high level qualities that you want to look for that set these types of boxes apart from the ones we saw in the previous slide that you'll see all over the stores that aren't necessarily designed with birds in mind. So again, there are some designs that use PVC, but I am going to focus mainly on the wood construction boxes. So to start off, let's talk about materials of the boxes. When you're talking about a wooden box, which is closest to what the bluebirds especially are going to be looking for, that mimics their natural cavities, because normally they'd be trying to find an old woodpecker hole in a tree. So when you're talking about wood, first thing is thickness. Generally, that wood should be 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch thick. And commercially, when you buy a 1x board, whether it's like 1x6 would be a common size board to buy if you wanted to build your own bluebird house. They say it's a 1 inch by whatever width and length, but really the actual dimensions are usually going to be closer to 3/4 of an inch of the actual board width. So when you go out there and see 1x whatever at the home store, at the Lowe's or Home Depot, that is probably the thickness that you would like for your bluebird house. Never use pressure treated wood or any sort of chemically enhanced wood. These chemicals are meant to preserve, obviously, and help that wood hold up to the outdoors. But the same chemicals that do that are extremely toxic to the bluebirds. And remember that the female, while she's incubating, the babies, the nestlings, are going to be spending a lot of time inside that nest box, touching and being exposed to that wood. And so chemically treated or enhanced wood to make it pressure treated and make it outdoor is bad news. That's not what you want to use. Instead, first option is to try finding a wood that is naturally resistant to the outdoors. And two examples of that are cedar or redwood. These woods naturally hold up well to the outdoor conditions. They can last you several seasons. Some people have nest boxes made of this material that last many, many seasons. And so if that's a great option, is to choose a natural wood that just naturally holds up well to the elements. Short of that, though, you can use other species of wood as long as they're the right thickness that are treated on the exterior with treatments like a water-based latex paint, preferably in a light color so it reflects sunlight. It does not absorb too much heat, so like a white or maybe a light green. So water-based latex paint on the outside, or things like raw linseed oil or maybe a Thompson's water seal, again, on the exterior to help the outside of the box hold up to the elements that it's exposed to. You would never want to paint or treat in any way with even these kinds of non-toxic treatments the inside of the nest box, because again, that's where the nestlings and the female spend so much of their time. The raw wood is going to much more closely mimic their natural nesting cavity that they would have sought out. So the inside, leave alone, no treatment. That part is not really exposed to the elements anyway. But the outside you could treat if you needed to. If you can't go with a cedar or a redwood, they are quite expensive types of wood to purchase. And so you can treat the exterior of a pine type of box with some of those treatments. So we just talked about what you can use and kind of the things to look for. When it comes to other nest boxes, I have a never use list. We already mentioned pressure treated wood. The chemicals are just not good for the birds, not healthy for them. Any kind of flimsy material like a milk carton or cardboard. I know some of you may feel like that's obvious, but it does need to be said because some people do try to construct their own nest boxes out of this type of material. To be crafty, I mean, you take a milk carton and you think maybe I can turn this into something. They just are too flimsy when it comes to holding up against cold. In Maryland, especially, our eastern bluebirds can start nesting as early as March. And so it's not uncommon to get those cold snaps that come through that, it can be very cold overnight, very cold even on some daytimes. So you want something that's going to hold up and keep them warm. Flimsy materials won't do that. And they would also probably break down during storm and rain and maybe even snow, again, depending on how early in the season they're nesting. Fabric, another poor choice, again, would not be insulated enough, wouldn't hold up to the elements, would get soaking wet, which would very quickly turn into a situation of hypothermia. Bluebirds are unlikely probably to choose fabric anyway. So again, all of these doesn't mean a bluebird would choose them, but just materials to stay away from. Metal, clay, ceramic, as the picture shows here, again, very cute and a neat concept. I actually have neighbors who have a ceramic house mounted to the side of their deck that I've kind of tried to warn them about. They still have it up that Carolina wrens like to nest in. Carolina wrens will nest in the weirdest of places. But as a best practice, metal gets very hot and could very easily get overheated and be harmful to the nestlings. And then clay or ceramic retains the heat. And so it will stay hot in there for longer periods of time, as well as all of these materials in some way, shape, or form don't meet some of the standards that I'll continue to talk about in the rest of this presentation. So these are some materials to try to definitely stay away from. Again, wood and non-pressure treated wood is a really great starting point for a nest box. A medium density fiberboard, worth mentioning too, because it is such a popular form of material to make indoor shelving and things like that. It can be a really useful material, not for a nest box. It's very dense, it's very thick, and when it gets wet, it does start to kind of crumble and does not hold up to the elements. So not a good nesting box material. Here's one that we've seen more and more, just because this type of material is becoming more popular, more widely used, is a made out of recycled plastic or composite material nest box. And these are fairly new. I think a lot of people are still trying these out perhaps and weighing in on them. I just want to go over some basics about these, both the things that draw people to them and the concerns that we have about them. First off, the perceived benefits, of course, are that they are durable. They make decking out of this stuff. And I'm talking about, when I say recycled or composite, I'm talking about like a Trex, that is a brand name of one of those decking that is made out of recycled sawdust and plastic. In fact, some of the decking companies that use this material brag that they use, they're made of X percentage of recycled plastic bags. So, that's the kind of material that's made out of. So they are very durable. They would hold up very well to rain, wind, snow. People use them for their decking. So obviously they're good for outdoors. They would be fairly easy to clean, again, because they're sort of slick and have that recycled plastic sort of surface. And so you could clean them out probably very easily. And at least at the beginning of their life cycle, these nest boxes would be eco-friendly because they are using materials that are being recycled and being reused. So that's a nice feeling, right? That they can use recycled materials. The downside of that is on the end of the nest box's life, you've used it, you're ready to get rid of it, throw it away. Those materials aren't biodegradable. They're not going to break down. And so the downside is that at the end of life, not so eco-friendly anymore. The dangers of these boxes made of this composite material, they get very hot. And I don't know if you've ever stepped onto a Trex decking in the summertime, but it can be quite warm, especially if the color is one of the darker colors. Just they are very dense and very concentrated. And so unlike natural wood that has more of that natural aeration, natural give to the elements and to the heat, this is a very, very solid, dense material, so it does get hot. The slick surface that actually makes it easy to clean is dangerous to the nestlings because they actually do need some sort of rough material to exit the nest box and fledge eventually. And so that slick surface can actually end up trapping nestlings in there and have them be unable to fledge. And this particular model that is pictured here lacks ventilation, lacks drainage of any sort, especially with a nest box like this that would get hot. Ventilation is going to be really important to keep airflow. And so overall, again, these are new. I know people are drawn to them. My perception of these right now are that no, I would not personally use one. I think they would get too hot. Certainly in hotter climates, I would never use one. Perhaps in a northern climate, if say you're in Canada or in the northeast of the US, Minnesota, places like that have mild summers, but the summers get hot even in those places. So my personal opinion on these is that I would say no for right now. We would need more data, and I personally am too concerned about the overheating and the density, but just thought I'd throw this out there because people are seeing these more in home stores. So I mentioned just now ventilation and drainage, and I want to start that conversation by saying that the needs do vary by the climate. Again, bluebirds can start nesting in Maryland in March. In March, our weather is kind of all over the place in Maryland in March. We could have these beautiful spring days followed by snow and followed by extremely cold snaps and cold overnight. In other climates, the bluebirds get started very early, like down on the southeastern side of the United States. They might get started early where maybe it's rainy, but the cold is generally not an issue. But even then, there could be random cold days. So ventilation especially is really dependent on the kind of climate that you're in. You do need ventilation no matter what, just for good air circulation and temperature control. Being able to have that hot air have a place to escape, new air come in, cycling in, the circulation is certainly important. You don't want things to be too hot, and so that ventilation is important. Generally, if you want to create ventilation in a nest box, there's two general popular ways to do that. One is towards the eaves of the roof of the nest box. You could drill about 3/8 of an inch holes drilled in an upward motion. And so if we were looking at this nest box here, you'd want to drill it sort of in an upward motion so that any kind of water or moisture coming in, if that hole is drilled in that upward motion, it would encourage the water to flow out and not necessarily be able to get in the same way if the hole was drilled down or straight on. So drilling the holes kind of in an upward motion is one option. 3/8 of an inch is generally good, and 3 or 4 holes along the eave of the top of that roof. Another option is to have more of a slot style ventilation. That can be accomplished by just creating a little bit of a gap when you're building the nest box and putting it together so that air can flow through that way. So 2 options there to help the ventilation happen, but without necessarily allowing much moisture or rain and things like that in. Drainage is also very important to have at the bottom of the floor of the nest box. So there's a couple ways to accomplish this too. You can drill holes, again, a couple 3/8 of an inch usually is good, in the corners of the 4 corners of the nest box, or you could simply, when you're building your nest box, kind of dog ear the corners. And so kind of cutting off that corner part and having it be a little straight section, and having those dog-eared corners be on the floor so you have that natural little triangle at each corner of the nest box to create the drainage. Another thing that I personally really like is when there is some sort of piece of hardware cloth, really small weave, if you can find it, at the bottom of the nest box that sort of sits up, whether it's because there are routed lines within the sides that it can slide into, or if it's folded so that it kind of elevates off of the bottom. What this does is it creates sort of a barrier on the bottom of the floor of the nest box so that the female, when she's laying, when she starts to build her nest, will build on top of that mesh instead of having the nest directly touch the wood on the bottom of the floor. I personally like this and have had a lot of success with this. I think if she sometimes is building even on a rainy day or a drizzly day and she's bringing in wet nesting materials, I think it helps that with that drainage and helps things cool off even more. It helps keep the nest dry from waste and other issues if there's kind of that little gap between the floor of the wood and where the nest starts, thanks to that mesh or that hardware cloth. And so it can help with drainage, and also in areas where there are parasites or blowflies, having it lifted off the wood can also help with that situation too. So another kind of good best practice that I like to follow that has to do with drainage and parasite control is to have that little gap. And again, as we're talking about all this, I want to let everyone know I do have resources to turn you to at the end that will give you exact plans and diagrams and all kinds of stuff so that all of this will make a little bit more sense probably when you see my talk compared with those resources. So don't worry if you can't quite visualize all of this as I'm talking about it. Dimensions are important. And again, this is what I'm showing here on the screen right now is dimensions of a classic NABS, North American Bluebird Society nest plan, very, very classic nest box. The dimensions really do matter. Bluebirds and other native cavity nesters do prefer certain dimensions depending on their size, what their instincts and what they know they need. And so, you know, really do some research when you're thinking about what kinds of native cavity nesters are in your area, which ones you're thinking you will attract to a nest box, because you may find that there's different dimensions based on the kinds of species that you're looking to attract. No matter who you attract, though, if it's a native bird, you should leave them alone and let them nest. Just because you want bluebirds and you get a chickadee doesn't mean you can interfere and try to help the bluebirds. It really is, that's the part of it where we're helping them, we're putting out a nest box, but ultimately within the native species, that they have to compete for themselves for that nest box. But dimensions do matter and can help if you're looking to attract a certain species. Eastern bluebirds, I'm generally finding, and other information, again, from all my research and all the resources that we use, is that generally the floor is going to be 5 inches by 5 inches. Some people use 4 by 4. I like 5 by 5. It gives them a little bit more space. And it makes a little bit more sense when you're purchasing wood to be able to just purchase a 1 by 6 and have that be, you know, the basis of most of your nest box. The height, usually about a foot tall. And then again, part of that might be because you will slant and kind of make almost a trapezoid shape with your sides to make sure the roof is slanted down. So you can see from the dimensions there, the front might be about 10 inches tall, but then the back is going to extend much, much taller so that you can have a roof that slants, and also helps to have extra wood there to attach your nest box to your pole and your mounting gear. The entrance hole generally about 7 inches from the bottom of the front of the next nest box is a good practice. You want the entry hole to be a little higher, not necessarily directly center, and have your roof be your floor be low enough that when the female bluebird builds her nest, sometimes they can build them quite high. And at first, when there's just eggs and new babies in there, the nest could be quite high before it starts to get weighed down and smushed down over the course of those couple of weeks as the nestlings grow. And the danger there, if you have your floor too high, is that it makes it a lot easier for a predator to be able to get into the nest, and the nestlings are sort of right there at the entry hole. Having them down a little bit lower is safer for them. I want to talk about roofs because I might have seen here the roof. I have 10 by 10, and we also see it on the diagram there. I think a lot of bluebirders, myself included, really like a big roof. There's a couple different benefits to having a bigger roof, and why you might even buy a 10 by board to be able to make your roof separate from the 1 by 6 board that you might buy to make the rest of your nest box. Large roofs serve a couple different purposes. First of all, having those eaves over the side, or the sides of the roof go out further from the walls of the nest box and out in front, can really help with keeping out rain, snow, wind, helps it extend to the elements if those vent holes are protected a little bit by a roof that's a little wider. I personally like a long roof that extends out on the front by several inches. I think mine extend out by about 4 or 5 inches because I use wren guards, and a wren guard is something that helps protect the nest box from house wrens. House wrens, you'll learn more about this if you join our other presentations through the rest of the week, but they are a native cavity nester. In some areas of the country, in North America, they would compete with bluebirds. It depends. They're much more prevalent in the southern eastern of the United States, and here in Maryland, they certainly are all over the place in the summertime. But they do like to get into nest boxes and toss out nesting material, toss out eggs, even toss out young babies before the babies get big enough that tiny little wren can't really toss them out anymore. And so one of the things you can do to deter these house wrens is put on something called a wren guard. It's really just simply any sort of material, but generally wood. You could use flashing. There's a lot of different ways to construct your own that sort of hangs in front of the roof, hangs down from the nest entrance. And it's still, the bluebirds still need to be able to get up under it and have enough space between the wren guard and the front of the box, as you can see here. So the upper arrow there is showing you that there is space between where the wren guard is hanging and the entry hole, because you want those bluebirds to, obviously they need to be able to access the entrance hole to feed their babies, but having that thing that covers the nesting hole, the entry hole from the outside world where you don't really know it's there, can help deter the house wrens. If they haven't found the nest box yet, that will keep them from even realizing it is a nest because they can't see the hole. So long story short here is that when you have that roof that extends several inches out, it makes it easier to just I usually drill my wren guard right into the front of the roof. There's plenty of space. You want at least, I think, 4 inches of space between the wren guard and the entry hole. And it gives you plenty of space. So that's another reason why I like that roof that extends out. But having a roof that extends out, again, great for weather protection, great for predator protection to some degree, because sometimes it can sort of start to disguise that hole that's there, makes hanging a wren guard easier. Speaking of entrance holes, different species of birds do like different styles and different sizes of entry hole. Eastern bluebirds, if you're going to go with a circular hole, 1.5 inches is the size that you would want. You don't want to go any larger than that if you're specifically trying to attract eastern bluebirds. Any larger than that, and you're inviting in non-native invasive predators like European starlings, who do like cavities, but they would not be able to access a 1.5 inch entry hole. And so you want to keep it the right size for the right species that you're trying to attract. If you get chickadees in your nest box and you want to further protect them, you could actually put a hole reducer on that entry hole that squeezes it down. I think for chickadees, it's generally, I hear 1 1/8 inch is something that could actually help the chickadees and restrict out even more species. So eastern bluebirds, 1.5 circular inch entry hole is one way to do it. There are other styles out there, as you can see in these screenshots. There's oval entry holes, there is a slot, there is even some what they call a 2-hole mansion that have 2 holes into your nest box. And those do serve a certain purpose. When there is an oval hole, a slot hole, or 2 holes, if a non-native invasive house sparrow were to come inside that nest box, it gives an adult bird who might be in there a chance to escape. They have some mode of getting out and getting away, even if the house sparrow is there, because they have maybe an extra entry hole, or the slot, the oval, can give them a means of escape. So some people like those in areas where there are sparrows. We'll talk much more about sparrows later in the week, house sparrows, and how they they predate and are a danger to the bluebirds. But in general, if you have house sparrows in your area and they're a problem, there are things we would obviously suggest that you would do to make them less of a problem before you would even hang a nest box. But this does make a means for escape. The problem is that when you have a oval hole, especially, or 2 holes, depending on where they're placed, an oval hole especially, again, does open this up to European starlings, blue jays, even other birds, that it would give them a bigger space to be able to reach into the nest and possibly predate babies or eggs. So there are downsides, there are upsides. My boxes, personally, I use just the regular circular entry hole that's 1.5 inches, and that's always been a wonderful option that my bluebirds and my tree swallows really love. Another thing to talk about is kerfs. If you've never heard this term before, the word kerf actually just means slices in wood. And kerfs are important because they give nestlings a way to climb out and eventually start peeking out of the entry hole and eventually fledging and leaving the nest. So if the inside of if you're using a nesting material that is more smooth, more of a finished wood, you definitely want to have these kerfs on the inside. We're looking at the inside perspective from being inside the nest box, to give them almost like a little ladder to climb up for fledglings. These are very easy to create. You can use them with a router, a chisel, a knife, a saw, anything like that, to be able to rough up the inside of that nest box door so that they can get out. Generally, you can space these anywhere from 1/4, 1/2, or 3/4 intervals to be able to, again, create that ladder. And you want to make sure the grooves are at least about an eighth of an inch thick, deep into the wood. You don't want to go too far because you don't want to endanger the integrity of the wood itself and have a risk of it cracking or falling apart, but something that does create a groove so that they can climb and be able to see out of the entry hole and start kind of seeing the world around them as they get ready to fledge and eventually be able to fledge. A slippery inside does really create a danger. Again, by the time they're done nesting and they're fledging and they're getting ready to fledge, the nest itself is usually smushed down a lot more than it was at first, and it can be difficult for them to get out, and it is a risk for them to end up being left in there. Eventually their parents are going to take care of the babies that have fledged, and so it's not out of the question that a fledgling could get trapped and eventually starve in a nest box if there's not a kerf and a way for them to get out. That is a risk. So kerfs, great idea. And I think the most important thing of all is going to be that you need to have the nest box have a way to open up safely for you to be able to monitor the nest boxes and monitor the progress of the nestlings throughout your nesting season. Again, it's one of the things that I hope of everything that you take away from joining us this week is that putting up a birdhouse, putting up a nest box is a responsibility. It is something that you should take very seriously. It's not something you can just set up and forget about and let people like to say, let nature take its course. Well, you've already interfered with nature a little bit, and in a good way, well-intentioned way, by putting up a nest box and wanting to help your native cavity nesting birds. And so it is important that if you're going to take that step, go all the way, go big or go home, I think, as people like to say. Do it the right way. Make sure it's a box that is good for them, is built for them, and monitoring. Being able, it is actually something we want you to do. Some people say, I don't want to disturb them, I don't want to bother them. You're not bothering them. You're contributing to citizen science by monitoring actively. Monitoring is essential for the success of your nestlings who choose to make your nest box home. There was a man named Larry Hebert in Missouri that did some studies and found that in a nest box that was designed with the right specifications, it was monitored weekly or more often, sometimes if there's any issue going on, and mounted on a pole with a wobbling predator baffle, which we'll talk about later this week. That Larry noticed in his studies that he found that usually it was a 90% plus success rate in those scenarios versus 65% success rate in a natural cavity. So we really have the power here to help these bluebirds. We've already shown that we've been able to help them and build up their numbers again if we do it the right way. And having a monitored box where you know what's going on is really, really critical to that. And we all care about the birds. We all want them to succeed. That's why we're doing that. So that's why monitoring is so essential. We monitor because we want to check for several things. First and foremost, non-native invasive species. We never want those non-native invasive species to be able to use and procreate from a nest box. Most of the birding, bluebird and other cavity nesting authorities out there, the different societies, and us at MBS, North American Bluebird Society, and others say it's really almost better, it is better to offer no nest box at all than it would be to allow a non-native invasive species like an English house sparrow to be able to use the box and procreate. And so you want to make sure you're checking about who is using this nest box, and by monitoring it and seeing what kind of nest is being built, what do the eggs look like, who's going in and out of the box, will tell you whether it's being used by a native cavity nesting bird like a tree swallow, a bluebird, a chickadee, for example, or whether it's being used by a non-native like a house sparrow. And then you want to be able to intervene in the ways that we recommend. And we'll, again, share more about that later this week if you do find that it's being used by a non-native invasive species to better protect them. So that's one reason why you monitor. Another is just check on the progress to know when were these eggs laid, and therefore when can I expect to see babies? Now that I know when the babies were hatched, when can I expect to have them fledge? To be able to keep track, we love your data here at MBS. I would love, every year I collect the data and we put that out there in our newsletter for people to see how their nesting season went. How many did they fledge? How many successfully fledged from the box, and what species types? So you get to see progress, you get to collect that data and have that science and be able to know what happened if something went wrong, what went wrong, and be able to correct for the future. And also monitoring helps you check for issues like having an ant infestation. Maybe there's a wasp building inside the nest. Maybe there's damage from a recent storm and you want to know that so you can replace a part of the box or replace the entire box. So there's a lot of reasons that monitoring is extremely successful to the nesting. And one of the main reasons why some of those boxes I showed, houses that I showed at the beginning of the presentation, are totally inappropriate because we care so much about monitoring. A lot of those little, gourd type and other cute nest boxes don't have any kind of door where you can go and look and see how the progress of the nest is going, who's using it. They might have a little clean out hole that can help you kind of try to scrape out and clean it out, but that's not the same thing as monitoring. And so you need to have a door, a safe door with access for monitoring so that you can keep up with the progress of your nest and know what's going on. To kind of start to wrap up here, I will mention that at MBS, we do have nest box kits that we can sell to you. The cost is $25. We will give you the kit. It is something that has to be put together, so it's not a fully formed nest box. We give you the kit, but very simple to put together with screws or nails if you prefer. I like screws. It kind of holds them together more sturdy for over time. Contact us through our website if you're interested in purchasing one of those. We recommend mounting these nest boxes on a 3/4 inch conduit, EMT conduit pipe And with a wobbling stovepipe predator baffle is usually what we prefer. We don't include those with the sale of the nest box. The sale is for the nest box kit only. But I want to throw it out there that our wonderful county coordinators, I am one of them, would love to talk with you about, the mounting of it, where you can get that pole, how you can put that together. Also, the resources that I'll share have lots of different advice and tips for how to build those. Very inexpensive, very easy to build on your own to make sure that they are protected. You never want to mount these boxes on a tree, on a wooden post if you can help it. You don't want to do that. A pole and with the baffle is really the best way to ensure success for these nests, native cavity nesters. And speaking of monitoring, as I talked about on the previous slide, and all the mounting, I hope you'll join us for the rest of this week. Tomorrow, Bonnie is going to actually take you through what monitoring looks like. What does it look like to monitor a nest? What do you need to do when you do that? What does that look like? What tools of the trade can you use for monitoring? So if you've enjoyed all of this about talking about nest boxes, join us for the rest of the story tomorrow and Thursday, especially, to learn what happens next after you have your nest box ready to go. Some resources that I want to share with you that I use to put together this presentation, and then we'll give you a lot more information to get you started. The North American Bluebird Society, their website has a number of different fact sheets and different plans that you can download, including the dimensions that I showed earlier for eastern bluebirds. And so great resource. We are an affiliate of NABS, the North American Bluebird Society, and you can get lots of great information in all of those plans there. We also frequently turn to Cialis.org. Cialis is part of the Latin term, the Latin name for our eastern bluebirds. There's a lot of plans and all kinds of great information on that site. It is such a one-stop shop for so many different things, experiences that people have had. And so there are nest box plans and other wonderful tips and advice available on that site. And of course, I hope you'll turn to us here at MBS, especially our county coordinators, if you need to be able to put together a nest box, you need help with that. You need help knowing where in my yard should I mount this? What's a great place for the bluebirds? Where am I going to attract bluebirds? Or how do I mount it? What do I use? Where do I buy these supplies? That is what our county coordinators are here for, to help you do that and walk you through that. Again, remembering that we are still working through a pandemic, and each county coordinator is going to need to use their own judgment as far as if they're willing to go on site, and what kind of social distancing and things like that they're going to want to do to make that safe for everyone involved. But please do reach out to our coordinators for whatever county you are in if you need any assistance with knowing next steps with all of this. Again, as I mentioned, I want to remind everybody, this is just day 2 of our week-long Bluebirds Forever Festival. As I mentioned, I talked about monitoring a nest box and how important that is. Tomorrow, Bonnie is going to take us on a monitoring trip to see what it looks like to monitor a nest box and how important that is, talking more about that. On Thursday, also related to this talk about the boxes, Homeland Security, Bluebird style, Bonnie will talk to us about how to protect these nest boxes, how to mount them properly and protect the nestlings inside and the female as she sits and incubates the nest. So some predator control tips there on Thursday. And then Friday, Stan will talk us through talking about planting native plants for bluebirds that will draw in the bugs that they need, that make up most of their diet. And then also, of course, things like berries and things like that will sustain them through the colder months. So I really hope that you will also come in on the rest of this week and join us for the rest of our presentations. And thank you so much for attending and learning more about us. I hope you'll visit our website, visit us and join our Facebook page, follow us there to learn more. And, this week's presentations are provided free of charge for your benefit to educate you. We've all spent, I think, more time observing nature during this last year when most of us have been home more. And so I hope, though, that this is a free, free festival that we've put on, but I hope you'll consider either making donations, volunteering, joining as a member of MBS. There's a lot of great memberships great benefits to joining us and being a member. And the donations that you make go to great causes such as putting up nest boxes in new areas. Right now, our funds have gone to putting up some some trail cameras to figure out who or what is predating nest boxes at Antietam National Battlefield. And so those donations really go a long way to help us help the Eastern Bluebirds. So I want to thank you all again so much for joining us today. Lisa, I'll go ahead and turn it back to you and we can go through questions if there are any.
Thank you, Dana. What a great presentation. We have a few questions here from our attendees. First, we have a question. I read somewhere that if you are treating the exterior of a pine box, you should not treat the front side. Is that true? And if so, why?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'm going to put it out there. If any of our other board members are on and would like to unmute themselves and join in or contribute to that, because I actually don't know the answer to that. And so, you know, Lisa, I don't know if anybody else from our group is on here who might know the answer to that, but I don't happen to know why the front would be excluded from that.
Hi, Dana, it's Kathy.
Hey, Kathy.
I'm wondering if the wording of the question, I'm wondering if what they mean is that you don't paint the inside of the box.
Mm-hmm.
If you paint a nest box, you need to paint only the outside, and it needs to be a natural or a light color, because we all know darker colors attract heat, and that's something that we don't want to do with our nest box. You don't paint the inside of the nest box at all, because chemicals in the paint can have a damaging effect on the young inside the box. So that's how I interpret the question.
Thank you. Yeah, as we covered, never want to do anything to the inside where all those babies and the mama spend so much of their time. So yeah, thank you, Kathy, very much.
Great. Sure. Our next question is, are there any commercially made houses that you'd recommend?
Again, I think, you know, there are commercially made houses out there that do a nice job. I have bought mine, not necessarily commercial in a store. I bought mine from somebody who makes nest boxes to the specifications. I think you should look and see if there's any sort of approvals or anything on the nest box that say that it is an approved design. You know, you could find some out there that are maybe at Home Depot or Lowe's that are constructed with the right materials, generally the right dimensions. Again, these are the things that you want to check against the best practices and the dimensions. I don't have any specific brands or anything. Again, if anybody else on the call from our group wants to suggest a brand or something they've found commercially that works, I've always built my own or had people build them for me. But again, it's not out of the question that there's going to be something commercially available at your local home store that might do the trick. If it's made out of wood, nothing's treated, the dimensions are right, the roof looks good and is sloped. If the roof is big enough, by all means, if it has a door, of course, that opens for monitoring, by all means, those are the qualities to look for. Again, I don't have a specific brand or anything I could point you to, but yes, if it has all these qualities that we talked about today, you very well might find a great nest box available commercially at a store.
All right. Our next question is, the only places I can put up a nest box on our property are either by a forest or close to the house. As a result, the only birds my nest boxes seem to attract are sparrows, which lose interest when I clean out any beginnings of the nest. Would I be better off not trying or just moving the box to the forest to possibly house a wren? Is there anything else I should do?
That's a great question, because where you place your nest obviously will impact who uses the box. As you've experienced, having it close to your house will bring in house sparrows for sure, because that's where they're used to. I will caution you, if house sparrows there's a lot of them in your area, you will want to consider whether or not it's wise to have a nest box up anywhere nearby. Sometimes if there's just too many sparrows, it's kind of a losing battle for the bluebirds, where no matter where they nest, it might put them in harm's way. Certainly want to encourage you to look at some of our materials on sparrow control, both passive and more active controls available on our website and through some of these other resources websites that I pointed you to. But putting it in more of a wooded area could actually also attract species like chickadees. Certainly wrens would possibly take a box in a brushy or a wooded area, but depending on where you are, chickadees might actually use a box that's in closer to a wooded area. And so that could be one thing to try, is to move close to the woods and see who you get. The open areas are the ones the bluebirds are going to like, but you could very well get a chickadee moving it to a more of the closer to the wooded area, and to try that. And to try, if you want to attract a chickadee, you could put a hole reducer on the front of the nest box where the entry hole is and size that down to make sure that the chickadees can use it, but larger species could not. And so I would suggest, trying that if you don't have an open area. The woods might be something to try. Again, just, you mentioned house sparrows, really try to see how many do you have, how big of a problem are there, what are you willing to do to control them? Because if you are overwhelmed with house sparrows, it again might just be a losing battle.
All right. And Valerie, who had asked the question about treating the front of that pine box, said that she is indeed referring to the exterior of the front wall.
Okay.
What I would say is, Valerie, maybe we can do some research on that. I have your email address, so maybe we can do some research on that and see if we can find an answer for you. Our next question is, I noticed a nest box graphic shared at the beginning, and it had a black color roof. Is that not a good idea?
Yeah. I think I know which screenshot you're showing. I think one of the, I believe it's Gilbertson boxes, which are the PVC birch made out of a PVC piping. That person must have had their nest box, the roof painted. Personally, not something I would do. No, I would think that would retain too much heat. I don't know if they painted it that way because of just the aesthetic of it. But no, you usually want to stick to a light color. And so that type of nest box, I wouldn't necessarily choose to have a roof that's dark. All
right. Our next question says, how do you monitor the nest if the front of the box opens? Will the babies fall out when you open the box?
Great question. I think this is one of the reasons why people are hesitant to monitor, because they are afraid of what might happen. And so a couple things. First of all, that there are generally a couple different ways that nest boxes will open for monitoring. Some of them do open from the front and have a door that swings upward from the front. Some go from the side. Some also open where the top opens up and you can look down inside. Certainly the kind where the top opens up and you look down inside, less chance of anybody escaping or falling out, because you're opening it from the top and you're not necessarily putting them in anywhere where they could fall out. I have never personally had an issue with this. One thing that you have to be very careful of, one thing to remember, is that inside that nest box, they're in a little nest cup, and they're actually sunk down in the nest a little bit so that they're not usually, especially when they're very little, they're not right there. They're not right there where they're going to immediately fall out. They're also not interested in jumping. You don't want to monitor your nest past about day 12 or 13 if you have a side or a front entrance, because that's when they are getting more active. They're fully feathered, they're within a week of fledging, and they're starting to be a little bit more active. But generally, when you open that nest box, their instinct is to sink down, hide, play dead. I'm just here, I'm trying to blend in. And so they're generally not popping up asking, hey, I want to jump out. I want to jump out. They are generally, very much down. It's something you want to do very quickly. You open up, maybe snap a picture, use a mirror, things that Bonnie will talk about tomorrow with monitoring, to help you get a quick peek to see what's going on. And then you close it up, and you close it up securely, whether that's with a screw or with a latch, and you walk away. It's a very quick process. And generally just be very careful, but generally you're not dealing with birds that are just hopping and trying to get out. They generally do kind of cower down and let you do your thing.
All right, thank you. Our next question says, I monitor an old nest box with some of the outer wood rotting, but it is still functioning. Does the box need to be replaced, or can I continue to use it?
That's great. And I know there's some hesitance sometimes to replace a box that's been used so well for so many years. You don't want to do anything to throw them off or drive them away if they've been using it. My concern would be that if part of it is rotting, that it's only going to take that one storm or that one time where you might not be there to see it right away for it to completely fall apart and be destroyed. And so I think anything that's like kind of actively rotting and chipping away, pulling apart, probably is due to be replaced for the safety of the birds. If you remount it in the same area, a brand new box, chances are they're going to take it, and they're not going to necessarily say like, wait a second, this isn't my old home. They're going to love the renovation and they're going to like that upgrade. And I think if you just sort of, again, wait until a nesting cycle is over, you never want to try to replace it maybe right in the middle unless it's a true emergency. But once they fledge and you have that opportunity to try to replace it, I think it's a good idea to replace it if it's starting to rot. And if you replace it in the general same area, chances are they're going to come right back and continue to use it.
All right, it looks like that's all the questions we have in reference to nest boxes. But I do have someone, I know we're going to be discussing this later this week, but she asked if you could talk a little bit about what bluebirds eat.
Yeah, I'll speak to that now, and we'll certainly let Stan talk about that more on Friday when we talk about planting for them. The majority of a bluebird's diet, especially in the springtime, is going to be insects, bugs. They love caterpillars, spiders, crickets, mosquitoes. All kinds of bugs are their preferred diet. I see caterpillars a lot. And I think I even read somewhere once that that's usually the majority, little worms, caterpillars of all kinds that are on the trees. They have amazing hunting skills. They have great eyesight. They can perch from a tall branch and dive down. And before you know it, they've landed on something that's yummy for them. So majority is certainly insects, and that's what's best for them and their nutritional needs, especially in the spring and summer when that is abundant to them. During the other months where bugs aren't insects aren't quite as readily available, bluebirds will eat from your feeder. They'll eat suet mixes. I've had experience where they will eat sunflower hearts, the kernels, not the shell, because they don't have those beaks that can break open the shells, but they will eat like the hearts. Suet mixes made from peanut butter, oats. There's some recipes that are shared, I think, through some of the sites that I put out there. Currants and raisins sometimes have had success with, but supplemental feeding, as you need to, because they do also like to, in the wintertime, get berries, hollyberry, dogwood, winterberry, all kinds of different berries that are native berries and healthy berries for them in the summertime. And Stan will certainly talk about some of those things that you can plant that will give them those natural food supplies through the winter time. So in general, that's the diet. I like to try to only feed to supplement what they aren't getting naturally. So I know a lot of people like to feed mealworms and things like that to bring them in. Certainly this time of year, that's really not needed unless you are experiencing something where a brood lost one of the parents and you're trying to help that surviving parent feed babies to get them to survive and get them fledged. So it's always best to try to let them rely on their natural sources of food, but there are things we can supplement with if we need to.
We do have another nest box question. How far from a low traffic road can you place nest boxes if they do not face the road?
That's a good question. Again, Kathy, I don't know if you want to weigh on this at all. I think if it's an option, or Lisa, if you want to weigh on it too, I think if it's an option to get it away from the road, and certainly facing away from the road, that's good. That's what you want to do. I personally would probably put it no closer than 20 feet or more from a road, just to try to keep them out of any danger. No matter what, bluebirds, they like to perch at the telephone lines, and sometimes they will dive down even if it's close to the road to get a bug. I think away from roads is preferred, but if you've got a really good spot and you've got no other choice and no other good spot in your yard, as long as it's facing away, but I would still, as far away from that road as you could.
I kind of agree with you, Dana, especially when you consider the fact that the babies are going to be fledging from the
Absolutely.
box, and you definitely want them fledging away from any traffic, because they're not always superior flyers when they first leave the
Yes.
box. So, yeah.
Yep, very true.
All right. Well, I think that's all of our questions in reference to this. We did have a few people ask about if we are recording these sessions and will they be available. And we are indeed recording, and we do hope to make them available at a later date. We do, of course, encourage you to join us at our programs as they're held live, but we will email everyone with information once we have it in reference to the recordings.